Looks like we're live. I just read something that I thought was a little bit weird. It got me thinking. I was kind of thinking of like some comedy you could do on the subject of indigenous, the rights of indigenous people, and this. Uh, I saw a tweet from a guy who's a social activist, right? And he's saying that Mennonites. It was actually about Mennonites, and he was saying Mennonites in South America are taking over indigenous land and deforesting, meaning just they're cutting down some trees. Now, Mennonites are not huge industrialists. They're not going to even have the tools necessary to deforest anything. But, trees just grow places wherever they can grow. So I guess sometimes you have to cut them down. Anyway, this guy was trying to make a big deal about, you know, how these Mennonites were deforesting indigenous lands. And I thought if you really add together all the claims of that side of the argument, you know, there really isn't any such thing as an indigenous people because of the fact that everybody migrated from somewhere, and you either just migrated there and there was nobody occupying it, so you just decided to colonize and conquer the land, or you displaced somebody else. You took it over from somebody else. And, Native Americans are called Native Americans, but they displaced the land from each other and they fought back and forth with each other. And that's just a fact. But this guy was saying that indigenous people were being harmed somehow from these people living on their own land where nobody else is living, cutting down the trees that are on their own land, and trying to make a big deal about it. And I thought, so now we have people claiming that the land is sacred. You're not supposed to cut down any trees. You're not supposed to violate the land by diverting its rivers or by, even planting crops on it. Everything should just be wild. Humans shouldn't affect nature, is the claim that they're making. And so that would mean that the natives were also evil because they hunted massive amounts of wild animals and slaughtered them and killed them painfully on hunting missions. Why are the activists not going after the natives for riding around stabbing and chasing and killing herds of buffalo and people and skinning them and wearing their skins? And the anti-fur industry seems to have no problem with natives doing it and indigenous people. But fast forward, then you've got this other area that nobody inhabits. Natives don't inhabit it. They could if they wanted to, but they don't. And then some other group comes by and they make use of that land and they turn it into a garden, they cultivate it. And that's when it becomes evil. It just was sort of strange to me that natives and indigenous people, instead of being treated like everyone else who just sort of, you have rights and you have, you need to have some claim over the land and you can sell that land and you can have that land stolen, and people have always had that throughout history. Every group has had stuff stolen. It's sort of weird that, if they were going around killing buffalo and horses and animals and critters and bunnies and squirrels and everything that they could get their hands on for their own survival, eating the meat and making use of all the bones and wearing their skulls and drinking their blood and stuff like that, that's all natural and good. But as soon as it's a certain group of people, I guess, then it becomes evil. And I would just like to know uh, who was doing it right. And I would just tell this activist, show me the people who have never done anything wrong by your standard, by this environmentalist, nature first thing. Protect all animals, don't eat any animals, but also don't cultivate land. Let land grow wild. So you can't grow crops and you can't raise farm animals. You can't have livestock and you can't hunt. All you can basically do is scavenge. And I guess that would be the morality. And then they, of course, themselves are always using phones and devices that require rare earth minerals, and they're the biggest hypocrites. So these activists, I mean, where I live, this whole area where I lived, and this is basically true of everybody in the whole middle of North America, is that all of the prairies and plains were swamps. And natives didn't do anything with swamps. They would freeze in the winter, and they would just be overgrown wastelands in the summer with millions and trillions of mosquitoes everywhere, and parasites and snakes. And they didn't do anything with it. They passed through, but they didn't want to claim that land. And of course, that's not true. That's true in Canada more than in central USA. But, the Mennonites here, they came in and made a deal with the government to irrigate the land, to drain the swamps, to turn it into fertile farmland. And that's the only reason why anyone even lives here. Before that, it was just uninhabitable marsh. So, I don't know. Do we need to be told that environmentalists are completely wrong? No, but it's always good to be reminded of just how backwards their logic is. It is now past 7:30. Welcome for everyone who's joining. We are just going to do a Bible study again, but I wanted to talk about something that I saw just before I came online. So, I did. So if anyone wants to follow along with Luke chapter 12, we got that here. And I'm ready to go. Thank you for Max and everybody who's joining in. If anyone's joining in on YouTube, welcome. So, let me see here. Let me just confirm that we were reading Luke chapter 11 last time. Yeah. The last thing we saw last time is that the Pharisees and the lawyers, the scribes, were now against him and were trying to catch him in sayings. And he had just barely given them a bunch of warnings because they were hurting the people with their legalism and their hypocrisy. He was saying a bunch of woe to you kind of stuff. Welcome, Parameter. Good to see you. For some reason, my Restream chat window shows that nobody's on YouTube, but clearly there are people watching on YouTube, so I guess I won't be able to see the amount of people watching there, but because you guys are chatting, then I'll be able to tell that you're out there. So, Luke chapter 12. Here's how it starts. I'm just going to be reading from the English Standard Version. In the meantime, when so many thousands of people had gathered together that they were trampling one another, he began to say to his disciples first, "Beware the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Nothing is covered up that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. Therefore, whatever you have said in the dark shall be heard in the light, and whatever you have whispered in private rooms shall be proclaimed on the housetops." The leaven of the Pharisees, of course, that's a term for yeast. If you know anything about baking and dough and yeast, you do just need a tiny little bit in the dough, and it spreads and spreads throughout the entire thing. And so it's a very good metaphor. And it says that it's hypocrisy. And I've heard a lot of people mention this, but again, I'm a big metaphor guy. So when I see the metaphor of yeast in dough being hypocrisy, I want to know what that actually means. So I guess it starts with a little bit, right? It starts just with being a hypocrite about one thing or another. And then as it spreads, the influence of that spreads, it eventually just spreads throughout your entire doctrine, your teachings. It has to be about doctrine, right? Because the Pharisees were hypocrites in that they tried to seem righteous and godly and be in control of everyone's doctrine in Israel. But they themselves were selfish and greedy and evil and hateful. Why would he say, beware the leaven of the Pharisees? I guess Jews especially were supposed to eat unleavened bread, right? And the whole point of, I guess that's the real thing, is that unleavened bread was considered holy because it wasn't puffed up. And so it actually relates more to that idea that God wanted them to eat unleavened bread to remind them to stay flat, dense, humble, substantial, not to seem bigger than they really are, but to be this sort of humble people who were sincere. And even though they didn't seem powerful, they were good inside. But when something has yeast and then it bakes, it rises up and it becomes puffed up, which is the illusion of substance, the illusion of being big, but it's not actually. And that was, Ashley says, not inflated in your mind. It's an ego thing. And when you scale it up to being an entire people, a society, it becomes sort of this glory-seeking thing. And that's why they weren't supposed to want to imitate pagans and the pagan kingdoms around them. And ultimately, they were supposed to be this sort of strange people surrounded by all these pagan nations that would have God on their side. And instead, they always tried to become bigger and more powerful. Solomon being a great example of that. Hello, Wasim on YouTube. And so here when he says the leaven of the Pharisees is hypocrisy, I guess the thing is, it's like if you were going to listen to the Pharisees, you would be puffing yourself up to make yourself seem really holy, big and fancy and rich and blessed by God, but the substance within you is all just air. It's all just puff. It's for show. And inside you're a small, hypocritical person that you know that you have all these problems. You know that you're not even a good person, but you want to seem so righteous. And so that's the hypocrisy, and that's why it puffs you up. It wouldn't be as much about the nature of yeast itself as what happens once you bake it, which is the rising, or I guess before you even bake it, it rises, and then makes you seem like you're a big shot. And then he says, when nothing that is covered up will not be revealed, and nothing that is hidden will not be known, he's saying in the next life, on Judgment Day, in God's eyes, you know, it won't do you any good to pretend in this life, because God will find out the truth and he will show the truth, and you will be judged by the truth and not by how people saw you. And so it doesn't help you to be popular and respected by everybody, because God is not going to respect that. And that's why those two go hand in hand. The puffing up and the hidden things becoming known are completely connected, even though they don't seem connected when you're thinking of the metaphor of, I mean, yeast is hidden in dough, you could say, but it makes itself known over time because obviously the dough starts rising. But I guess that is part of it. I guess the part of it is that you find out who's a hypocrite, and you find out who has leaven by the fact that eventually they become puffed up. And so that's true as well. And it says, whatever you've said in the dark will be heard in the light. Whatever you've whispered in private rooms will be proclaimed on the housetops. Of course, that's not literally true where anyone is proclaiming your secrets on housetops. But it's true that on Judgment Day, God will judge you by your private thoughts and not by just how people thought of you. Sabrina says yeast also eats away and overtakes. Does it eat away? What does it eat away? I never thought of it that way. Ashley says, super cool verse considering all the things going on in the media and world today. I mean, the fact that hidden things are being revealed is definitely happening, and hypocrisy is being exposed all the time. Carrie asks, what are we studying today? We're going to Luke chapter 12. And we want to understand some of Jesus' sayings. Now that the Pharisees are against him, the scribes are against him, we start to see this opposition more clearly. And I believe Luke, I'm just going to quickly give you guys a little take on Luke, is that Luke was the disciple of Paul. He wasn't one of the original disciples. We know that from the first chapter of Luke. He says that he came afterward and did research on the subject. And so this gospel is made out of a bunch of research that Luke did. But when you understand that Luke was a disciple of Paul, and there's a couple reasons to believe that, such as the fact that the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts were written by the same guy, and they were written to the same person, Theodosius. And by the end of the book of Acts, the author of the book of Acts is clearly following Paul around in his journeys, and he's talking about, we went here and we did this and we did this. And so it's written from a first-person point of view of Luke traveling around with Paul. And so once you understand that, the fact that Luke keeps focusing on the Pharisees and how evil the Pharisees are becomes more interesting, because Paul was a Pharisee, and if anyone would know how evil the Pharisees were, it would be Paul. And so he's actually exposing his former people. And that's why you keep seeing in Luke the mention of Pharisees and what they're doing and how Jesus was opposed to them. The Gospel of Luke does a huge job of undermining legalism and the Pharisees. Sabrina says yeast feeds off of sugar and gluten. I see. I guess that makes sense, yeah. So, verse 4 says, I tell you, my friends, do not fear those who kill the body, and after that have nothing more that they can do. But I will warn you whom to fear. Fear him who, after he has killed, has authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? And yet not one of them is forgotten by God. Why, even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, you are of more value than many sparrows. This is one of my favorite passages. Barry says, I love how even back then they had beautiful metaphors for purity of mind, body, and spirit. Yeah, me too. And, human nature hasn't changed. Just the circumstances that we live in. So here he says, I like this part where he says, don't fear those who can kill the body, and after that have nothing more they can do. Fear the one who, after he's killed you, can cast you into hell. And then he says again, yes, I tell you, fear him. And I've heard, and I've made a bunch of videos on this in the past, where people don't want to believe that they should fear God. They want to believe that love is all that we should feel. There are verses later on that talk about how love overcomes fear, or there is no fear in love. And so there's this idea that you can't fear God and love him at the same time, that we have to grow out of fear and become just loving. But Jesus Christ himself tells us to fear the one who has authority to cast into hell. And I believe that's a real command. Let's just look up some of the Greek here. So he says, for the word fear, it is, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, but it comes from the word phobos. The word that's used here is phobithet or something like that. But it comes from phobos, which means to frighten, to be alarmed. And then it says by analogy to be in awe of or revere. But that's not the Greek original term. As far back as Homer, which is like ancient Greece, hundreds of years before Jesus, this word phobos meant to put to flight, to flee. And in the Septuagint, it's mean to be afraid, to struck with fear, to be seized with alarm. It has to do with very real fear. And then it's used in some cases. Let's see here. Yeah, it's used in the New Testament for God, but for some reason it's taken as being just reverence. But even there, it has to do with trembling and astonishment and being agitated, terrified. I don't know the last time when you guys actually felt afraid of God, but it is a positive thing. It's not a hateful, resentful fear. It is a fear of one who is righteous and who is you're not able to hide from, you're not able to make excuses to. It is just a fear of a righteous judge who knows everything about you and has every right to destroy you. And the fact that we have mercy is what creates that love. But we don't deserve that mercy, and so we should not stop being afraid. Jesus himself says that we should fear the one who has the power to cast us into hell. And I don't want to get rid of that feeling. I think that's how people become complacent. Sabrina says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The knowledge of the Holy One is... you didn't finish it, but yes, that verse definitely says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That is just one of the big keys of all of the Bible. You see in the Noah's flood that God killed all of humanity and only spared one family, and he was justified in doing so. That's the thing. God didn't have to apologize to people for doing that. He was correct in what he did. That just tells you how we're not immune to that. We should be afraid. Hell, we have warnings about hell. We're told from Jesus that most people will go to hell. Here he's warning you to be afraid of the one who has power to cast you into hell. But then he says, are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies, and yet not one of them is forgotten by God? So what does that mean? Why tie that in with this fear concept? Why connect fearing God with all of the hairs of your head are numbered, and then look at this. Fear not. In verse 7, fear not, you are of more value than many sparrows. Isn't that a contradiction right there? Fear not, you see? So, Andrew says fear equals respect, acknowledgement of his position. So here's the thing. People want to have the respect, the idea of respect, but they don't like the idea of actually being afraid of God. And what I'm saying is, what happens when you fear God, when you actually fear him? You're like, God is scary. He's not just someone I respect. I don't just acknowledge his position. I know that he's terrifying, and I couldn't handle seeing him. I would die if I saw God, because it would be so terrifying. Not like an ugly monster or some demon or something evil, but actually a righteous God is more terrifying than some, imagined horror of some cartoon or some science fiction alien or something like that. The righteous God is way more terrifying, because he's the creator of all of the universe. He controls heaven and hell. And so, should you fear him? Well, it tells you right here, yes, fear him. But then the next verse, or 2 verses later, it says, fear not. You are of more value than many sparrows. So can anybody tell me what it means that we're supposed to fear God, and then it says fear not? Because I have an interpretation that I think makes pretty good sense, but it's not one that I hear other people talk about, and I wonder if you guys would accept it. Casado says, what are you ralking about? I do not know what the word ralking means. I don't think that's English. Oh, that was probably supposed to be talking. Well, I'm talking about verses in Luke chapter 12. Stephen says, "Fear not that God thinks of us as nothing but ants or something. He holds intrinsic value for us." Right? I mean, it says that the hairs of our heads are numbered. We are more valued than many sparrows. So he values us, and even a random sparrow God knows about and cares about. But why should we be afraid of him then? He says, fear him, and then now he says, fear not. Because I'll tell you what I believe. I think that the key here is to say, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, when you fear God, you stop being afraid of everything else. I'll say that again. When you fear God, you stop being afraid of everything else. You can't fear God and fear the world at the same time. The fear of one drives out the fear of the other. If you fear the world and you fear being killed, you fear being oppressed and people slandering you and persecuting you, you're not fearing God in that moment. Because if you did fear God, you would remember that he's the one who controls your soul and your destiny, and that no matter what the world does to you, he can glorify you, he can defend you, he can raise you up, he can give you everything that you need. But when you're fearing God, it's also true that you don't fear the world, and so you're immune to the fear of the world when you're fearing God. And that's why it says, I will warn you whom to fear. Fear him who after he is killed has the authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. And then a couple verses later it says, fear not. You are of more value than many sparrows. Because you're not afraid of the world anymore. Because although God is scary in his power, his righteousness, when you're afraid of him, ironically, you have nothing to fear from the world. So you become more courageous than anyone when you fear God. But you are more afraid than anyone of God. And so the fear of God drives you to do things that most people would be terrified of. Exactly like how Jesus Christ, because he feared God, was willing to go through all of that suffering and persecution and to be nailed on a cross, even though he was innocent, and to be despised by the whole world and to be betrayed by his own apostles. This is the darkest point in any life you could have. And he feared God rather than man. So he didn't fear death. Even though, he feared God. And likewise, if you fear death and you fear the world, you're going to run away from your duty to God. You're going to betray God because you don't have your priorities straight. And so once you have God as your top priority, everything else becomes a joke. It doesn't matter. Oh, I got fired. I had, somebody said something bad about me. The New York Times wrote an article condemning me. The whole world hates me. That's not who I care about. I care about God. And if God is with me, who can be against me? That's a verse from the Bible as well. And the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, not because it unlocks all this knowledge, but because it puts everything into perspective, that nothing matters except God. And so if I'm following God, I'm immune to the world. I have the next life where God is going to reward me, and I will serve him until the death. And there's nothing, I don't need anything more than that. Lovely Soul on YouTube, thank you very much for tuning in this evening. Nice to see you. Sabrina says, we fear him because of consequence, out of consequence, not out of understanding who he is. Well, I fear him because Jesus Christ just tells me to fear him. And so does the rest of the Bible. But I don't think that's... I think that's just the proper way to relate to God. And the reason why Jesus is so important in that story is because he's the mediator that we don't have to be afraid of. Jesus is the merciful representative that God sends because he does love us. And he dies in our place. And his resurrection and his glorification shows that God is merciful and that he's going to save all of us who fear him. And so we don't have to be afraid of Jesus, but we should be afraid of the Father while understanding that he loves us. And if, I don't know, like what you guys had relationships with your father, your human father, but, you know, I was afraid of my father, but I knew that he loved me. And whenever something would come up where I was in trouble or danger or I needed something, he always gave me what I needed. He always protected me, but he was scary. He was, you know, I had an old school kind of dad, and he wasn't my best friend. He was my father, and he was a stern, disciplined person, and he had expectations of me, and he told me when I was full of it and when I was wrong, and he corrected me, and he punished me when I was wrong. And that was all love. And so you can obviously, I think it should be obvious, hopefully everyone had a father who had some of that. You can fear them and know that they love you and want to protect you and want the best for you at the same time. Now we have parents being basically, trying to beg their children to love them and to be it's reversed. The parents are scared of their children, and that's just a satanic inversion of how the world is supposed to work. Frank Davila says, I was scared of my father due to not wanting to disappoint him. Yeah, that's part of it. And why is that bad for God the Father? Why should we not be afraid of our Father in heaven? I mean, why should we take him lightly or think about it as some trivial thing? If your father on earth was willing to give you a whipping, or, that's what everyone in all of human history did until this last generation. The Father is going to be willing to do that to you as well. He's going to be willing to give you a little temporary pain so you learn your lesson. And guess what? Ultimately, he has the right, every right, to disinherit you, to give you no part of his coming kingdom, to hold you, to judge you, to cast you into hell and destroy you. And I say, let's be afraid a little bit of our Father in heaven, not because he's evil, but because he is righteous and good. It's specifically because he is good and not evil, but we are evil, that we should fear him and want to please him and I don't see that as a negative. I think you can have both. I think you need to have both. I think one leads to the other. I think that only a sociopathic, petulant, entitled, proud person thinks that fearing God requires you to resent him and to hate him because you are so selfish and self-righteous that you don't even understand that he knows better than you and that you're wrong and he's right, and that he's watching you. Like it says, all the hairs of your head are numbered. That's what Jesus says here in Luke 12. And you are of more value than many sparrows. You see how that goes right hand in hand with the fear. So you have an obligation to do what's right because you have value in the eyes of God. But if you take him lightly and you don't fear him, but instead you fear the world, you fear those who can kill the body, but after that have nothing more that they can do, verse 4, then you're in trouble because you're going to start making all the wrong decisions. It says, and I'm sure this will be connected. Let's go to the next verse here in verse 8. And I tell you, everyone who acknowledges me before men, the Son of Man will also acknowledge before the angels of God. But the one who denies me before men will be denied before the angels of God. And everyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven. But the one who blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. And when they bring you before the synagogues and the rulers and the authorities, so this is just taken for granted that you will be brought before them, do not be anxious about how you should defend yourself or what you should say, for the Holy Spirit will show you or will teach you in that very hour what you ought to say. This is actually connected. Think about this. He says, acknowledge me before men and I'll acknowledge you. If you don't, if you deny me before men, I will deny you. And that, of course, means eternal hell. That means damnation. But he says that you will be forgiven for speaking words against him, but not against the Holy Spirit. And then immediately says, when they bring you before synagogues and rulers and the authorities, don't be anxious about what you're going to say. Now, here again we have fearing God, but not fearing men. Don't be anxious or afraid of what you're going to say in front of rulers and synagogues and authorities. So again, the fear of God drives out the fear of man. But the fear of man drives out the fear of God. You can't have both. You can either fear man or God. If you have the fear of God, you don't have the fear of man. So when you fear God and you acknowledge God, Jesus Christ in front of man, you don't have any worry about what these rulers and authorities and synagogues are going to do to you. And so it says, don't be anxious. Don't be afraid of how you should even defend yourself. And so again, once you fear God, and it's using the same word for fear. So it's not a different kind of fear. Those who say it's talking about just respect and reverence, why do you think he uses the analogy, don't be afraid of those who can kill the body? That's terror. That's a visceral fear of being killed. But he says, do fear, using the same word, fear God. If you had a real fear of God as being someone who can kill you and has that ability and then can also cast you into hell, then you would be disciplined. You would be strict. You'd be a very real servant who fears his master, and you would not be afraid of other people. You know, and in history, this is actually how it works. When you have, for example, a military, many militaries work with a chain of command where the reason why the soldiers are willing to go into battle and die is because they're more afraid of their commanding officers. It's messed up, but that's actually how it works in real life. And people would do insane things for their king, not because they had no fear, but because they feared their king. Disappointing their king, breaking their vows, the shame that would come from that, but also just the very real punishment of what would happen if they didn't do their duty. And so, here again, we're told to not fear humans, not fear the authorities and the rulers, but rather fear God, honor him, testify about Jesus Christ in front of men. And what happens? You will be acknowledged before the angels and before God. He will make sure that you get your reward. So it is love. It's not just fear for the sake of a petty dictator trying to, boss you around. It's once you do this, you act out of a fear of God, you will be rewarded. You have value. And I believe that those who don't fear God drop in value pretty sharply in God's eyes, to the point where on Judgment Day, if you haven't learned to fear God by that point, when life will try to teach you to fear God, but most people don't pick up the hint. And certainly satanic society tries to hide that from you. By the way, I never said hello to Patronizing Saint. Thank you for coming, Patronizing Saint, and God love. So, I think life will teach you to fear God, but if you don't, that's when your value drops to the point where God will just burn you up in hell, because you actually don't have any value to him if you're not fearing him enough to do what he says, what you are supposed to do. It says, the parable of the rich fool here, which is the next verse in verse 13, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to him, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul,'" soul, I just love the poetry of the way he says that. "And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'" Again, I see the connection again. You see, when you fear God, you give him everything. When you fear God, you're not thinking of your selfish needs. This guy is saying to himself, soul, you have many goods, everything will be fine. But God says, your soul is required of you, and whose will they be? So when you lay up treasure for yourself and are not rich toward God, you lose that connection with God. God requires a certain degree of fear and obedience in order to connect with you and teach you what you should be doing and give you your correct priorities. I'm seeing that this is connecting with people in the chat, and that's making me very happy and excited, because I believe this is one of the great lost messages of the Bible, somehow against all common sense in my mind. And I'm guilty of it in the past too, for sure. But, somehow we have lost the fear of God. And it's insane. It is clinically insane to not fear God. There's something wrong with you if you can, every human, regardless of whether you even know the Bible, should be afraid of God. But we lose that, and Satan's society is trying to teach us to be proud and selfish and comfortable and act as if nothing bad will ever happen to us, and that we don't have any judge over us, right? We're just, we're entitled to things. We're just entitled to what our rights are and what we deserve. And where do you think that comes from? That doesn't come from God. That God has never been about that. So he tells him, he tells him to not covet what his brother has. His brother is supposed to divide the inheritance. This guy's being cheated. He's being swindled. And Jesus doesn't even acknowledge that that's a real concern. Because think about it. Jesus knows that all of this is going to get sorted out in the next life. So this is why Jesus is always flipping people's concerns on its head and showing them that the things they're concerned about don't matter. We read in the last chapters when they're saying, "Blessed are the breasts of the woman of your mother who you suckled on, and blessed is her womb," and stuff. And he says what? He says, no, rather blessed is the one who hears the word of God and does it. He says, those who are hungry and whatever, he says he does heal them. He does the miracles, but he also tells them, that the food that they eat is not what they should be excited about, but instead the fact that they hear the word of God. And so, again and again, the priority is on the next life and not on this one. The priority is to fear God, not man. The priority is to testify about Jesus and not be afraid of what the authorities are going to do to you, but fear God. He's the real authority, you see? So don't take it lightly. This isn't a philosophy. Christianity in the Bible is not a philosophy. You hear other people say, like Buddhists will say, don't be materialist. It just drags you down. It hurts your connection with the present, and you need to be generous. Okay, that's all a similar sounding philosophy, but it actually is completely hollow and meaningless compared to this, because here you actually have a righteous judge who knows everything that you've suffered, especially if you've suffered it for his sake and for his name, and he will reward you. It's not just about this life and how to live the best life currently. It's an acknowledgement that this life is a test, and then you get rewarded in the next life or punished in the next life, and you should be afraid of that. Let me read some comments here. Max says, 100%, God dropped a big hint on my dumb head. Wanwin says, great explanation. I fear and respect my Heavenly Father. Laughing Home, hello. Dee's Prepper says, don't save money. Don't trust in the saving of your money. Don't believe in your heart that the money you've saved will ultimately help you. I save money, to the extent that I can. I believe at some point, somehow it will help somebody, either me or somebody else. I think it's good to be responsible and to not just live recklessly. But do I actually trust that that's going to help me in the long term? Not at all. Not even in the slightest. I would fully expect that in the course of my life, my money that I've saved will be stolen. I will be defrauded. The banking system will collapse. If I bought something, it might be confiscated by some, tyrannical government, or I will lose it somehow, or there might be some need that comes by and I just have to, I have to take care of it, and that will just blow all my savings, and I won't ultimately end up with, what do I end up with at the end of my life? You can have everything you ever wanted, but you still die. You'll just be surrounded by more stuff. And so I try to use my money to help people, or to be practical, to for example, to get books to learn, to get an internet connection so I can talk with you guys, so I can have the equipment I need to do something to serve the kingdom. But, I don't have luxuries. And the savings, I got to say, just as somebody who is aware of how the world works, they're looking for a way to destroy your savings. Savings is already getting eaten up by inflation like crazy. And they want to make that as bad as possible so that anybody who has money in a savings account is screwed. They don't want you to have savings. And so not only is it bad in a sort of a universal sense to rely on your savings, but in a very real way, they're coming for that money. And, they're going to try to devalue it. So don't be proud of it. If you think Bitcoin is going to save you, if you think gold is going to save you, you're going to end up in a dirt hole with everyone else who ever died. And that money, like he said here, your soul is required of God, and that stuff is just going to pass to somebody else. You need to trust in God, is what I'm saying. You need to believe that He is the one who can deliver you. If you have $0, God can take care of you. If you have millions of dollars, God can take it all away in an instant, and you'll be standing before the judgment throne, and that money won't help you anything. And so the perspective, again, it's about getting your priorities straight. Warchild says, when I curse with His name, I repent right after it comes out. I think that's fair. I would just say that technically God is not God's name. It's a title. But if that's what your conscience tells you, certainly, you have to repent. Midnight Passion says, I see so many not fearing God, fearing anything. I pray for them. Debbie says, I'm fasting 2 days in a row. I understand. And I think fasting is probably I've been curious about fasting, and I think fasting is probably a good way for a lot of people to sort of feel to be reconnected with a sense of urgency and humility, because there's nothing like hunger to make a person realize how vulnerable they are. A lot of people, when you're well fed and you have a good diet and stuff like that, you feel like there's something, you must be doing something right, and you're comfortable and you're okay. But even though it's a voluntary choice to do fasting, there's something just about being hungry that makes you realize that you are completely dependent on a normal, regular cycle of blessings coming into you that come your way. And I don't personally do fasting. At least I haven't so far. But I can understand that, and I'm trying to appreciate fasting more. Frank says, that's what happened to the modern day church. Preach love and joy and grace. Yeah, I think some fire and brimstone preaching is good. I personally have always resonated with it. It affects me very deeply when I think about it. And I think it creates a revival. I think it creates a renewed commitment in a way that just preaching love and peace, even though we do receive love and peace, it should be love and peace on the heels of a sincere, fearful worship of the Father as the righteous judge. It's in the same way that when, you are, well, my dad's dead, so it's kind of, it's emotional for me to talk about it, but to remember when, my dad would chastise me for some way, or I would be scared, that maybe he would be angry with me or something, and to go to him and to have the reassurance, I could see that he appreciated that I took him seriously and that I cared. And then there would be just this much greater peace when you realize, oh, he doesn't hate me. He's not angry with me. He appreciates that, I screwed up maybe, but now I'm being respectful, and I'm not justifying myself and defying him and rebelling. I'm submitting myself. And that submission is fear. That submission also endears you to your Father, and your Father in turn will love you more because you submitted, because you were not rebellious. Verse 22 says, and he said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life. Again, this is obviously the theme of the chapter. Do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body. That's a huge one. Or what you will put on, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. And yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive today in the field, today, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Then he says, fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, and with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. What absolute golden words. Edward says, only Jesus can save us. We will lose everything except what we have treasured up in him. What we just read confirms that. Debbie says, humility is a very good description. Barry says, fasting is basically relying on the word for nourishment. The flesh is insatiable. Here again, we see Jesus saying, don't be anxious about life. Do fear God. Care about him, submit to him, fear God, but do not fear the worries of this life. Think about today's situation, the chaos in the world, the death and despair and hatred and confusion, as it seems like everything is slipping into hell and the world is falling apart and we're surrounded by lies and psyops and staged crises and lying politicians at every turn, and everything is going to hell. This is still true. It has not changed, and it will never change. Do not be anxious about your life, what you're going to eat, what you're going to put on your body, or your body itself. Life is more than food. The body is more than clothing. God can take care of even the birds, the ravens, that somehow they survive. And Jesus says that God is the one who feeds them. He doesn't say that nature feeds them. He doesn't say that this is a natural process. He gives God direct credit for feeding the most irrelevant birds and animals in the world. And he says, you have more value than the birds. How much more value? So again, this also just speaks to how it's not that we're entitled to anything. He doesn't say that you deserve more than the birds. He says that you are of more value. God is more aware of your situation than you think. He knows how to take care of you. He can arrange things. He's arranging things all the time. And the fact that you've gotten as far as you have is proof that that's true, because how long in your life were you not even able to walk, to talk, to feed yourself, you were completely taken care of by things beyond your control? You're only alive today because of many years of everyone else and everything else working in your favor. But somehow, once you become an adult, you forget that fact and you think, now it's all up to me and God doesn't even know what's going on in my life. He says, you can't even add a single hour to your life by being anxious. I think, ironically, you actually shorten your life by being anxious. And he says, why are you anxious about the rest if you can't even do that? Not even 1 hour. The part about the lilies, where he says how they grow, and that not even Solomon in all his glory was arrayed like one of these, is one of my favorite verses, just because I have always felt that way about nature and how much superior the beauty of nature is than the most fashionable things in society. the timeless beauty of nature does surpass human achievement. And that's one of the funny things about history, but also the Bible itself, where you have these kings and you have these rulers, and the Bible always emphasizes how they turn into nothing. They decompose. Their legacies are mixed at best. They don't have anything to show off anymore. They're dead. They're gone. Jesus pissed off a lot of people in his ministry by talking about how he was greater than the ones who came before him, and they were all worshiping their ancestors, like almost every culture worships their ancestors. But Jesus always disrespects the ones who came before, not because we're supposed to be disrespectful, but because he is bringing in the kingdom. And that's exactly what it says here. The kingdom is going to last forever. And so those guys just had their own kingdom and it disappeared and it's gone. The kingdom that Jesus is bringing in will never, ever be corrupted. It will never be overthrown. It will last for eternity. And so, by comparison, yes, they are all nothing. They're all jokes compared to Jesus and what he's doing. And if you are part of that kingdom, that should be your number one priority. You shouldn't worry about the stuff that's going to happen in this life, what you're going to eat, what the nations are doing, what wars there are, earthquakes and tornadoes and whatever. Those things have to happen, but you're supposed to seek the kingdom, and then God knows how to add everything else that you need. Warchild says, when I look at a storm, I think that only God creates such a beautiful sight. I don't think that when I have a snowstorm, but a good rainstorm, I feel that. I'm weary of winter by now. I don't know if you guys can tell. We're in late February and it's just bitter cold again. And like, when are we going to get to spring? But I know exactly what you mean. I'm going to quickly blow my nose. I'm going to be right back. Thank you guys for the 12,000 likes. Wow, that's really awesome. I'm a huge fan of this whole Luke series. And by the way, guys, if you haven't gone to my YouTube channel and seen that it's all archived there, all of these studies have been stored there, so you can actually go back and rewatch them. And, you know, if you're thinking this chapter sounds like it has a lot of gems in it, a lot of, you know, wisdom and a lot of things we could learn from and we need to study, the same is true of every other chapter that we've studied in Luke. Like this, the gospel is packed with this stuff, and I try to unpack it whenever we do these studies and to show you guys how much wisdom there is in this. And so do go and rewatch those other ones too. If you're ever feeling like, I only do this 2 days a week, but you can go back any other day of the week. And instead of watching a bunch of fearful news and hate and paranoia and whatever, you can just go and actually watch another study of the Bible, and we can actually learn God's wisdom, and you can put your mind and your focus on something that's edifying and nourishing and good for your soul. And I would highly recommend that you guys click the link in my bio, go to the link tree and find the YouTube channel, and then watch these studies back, because that's the whole point, is to have a nice record of all these things. And ultimately it becomes dozens and dozens of hours of high quality, I think high quality, just by the nature of reading verbatim the verses of the Bible and studying them, not because of me, but because of the Bible. It's high quality. Compare that to like a whatever. I mean, pick your thing. If it's Tim Pool or Steven Crowder or Joe Rogan or whatever your guy is that you normally listen to, think about how you have spent so many hours watching that kind of stuff, and it's all nothing now. It all just goes away. It becomes smoke. But God's word stays, and it becomes only more powerful over time. I mean, I watch all sorts of stuff. I try to keep up with things, but I really don't see a lot of people actually reading verbatim from the gospel, from the Bible, and studying it. And that's what I felt like I needed. That's why I do the study myself. And there is a huge archive by now of doing these things. We did Corinthians. We've done different various topical studies. And now we're going through Luke. So let's try to get through Luke before the end of the hour here, if we can. He says in verse 35, Jesus Christ says, "Stay dressed for action and keep your lamps burning, and be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him at once when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will dress himself for service and have them recline at table, and he will come and serve them." Interesting. "If he comes in the second watch or in the third and finds them awake, blessed are those servants." Whew. If you know what he's talking about here, I just got hit with that because we're in the third watch. I mean, it's been thousands of years, guys. Thousands of years since this was said. We are in the late time. And me and you, sitting there at home watching this, listening to this, we're in that watch. And he says, if he comes on the second watch or the third watch, find him, and he finds you awake, blessed are those servants. He says, blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes. Now, awake in this sense will not just be the sense of alive or dead, because sometimes the Bible refers to people who are alive as awake and people who die as being asleep. This is talking about being ready. He says, stay dressed for action. Keep your lamps burning. Be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from a wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him at once when he comes and knocks. It's the readiness to open the door for Christ, to serve him as a servant who is fearful, because only a fearful servant would be doing that, by the way. And those servants, if the master comes back, if Jesus comes back at that late time when no one would be expecting somebody to arrive, that's the whole point here. I don't know if you guys know how watches work, but I don't know how many hours it is, but there's like a 4-hour chunk of time, and it's like 4 hours, 4 hours, and 4 hours, or whatever it is, maybe 3 hours or something. But there's these different watches in the middle of the night. And the later it gets, the more absurd it is to think that somebody would show up at that time. You know, you'd think that your master would be resting somewhere else, sleeping somewhere else. And so the idea that Jesus would wait so incredibly late to show up, many people have given up on the idea of Jesus coming back. And even the Christians, so-called Christians who are around today, they do not act as if he's going to come back anytime. And of course, I interpret Revelation in my book. Maybe everyone is wrong, and I believe that there's still events that have yet to happen before he comes back. But at the same time, we're seeing here that that readiness is what matters. It's not that he will come back when you're alive. Otherwise, it would discredit everybody who was before us, who died before he came back. No, that's not the point. The point is that you are always acting as if you are ready. And I believe that we are actually very deep into the third watch, so to speak. And that's what he's predicting here. And he's saying that if he comes in the second watch or in the third and finds them awake, blessed are those servants. So you need to stay awake now. You need to be ready now. And he says, but know this, that if the master of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have left his house to be broken into. You must also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. That was definitely true of the early church. They had no clue that he was going to be waiting thousands of years. And we could be wrong. I could be wrong in my interpretation that it's going to be only another 10 or 15 years before Jesus comes back. And it's not going to stop me from acting as if he's coming back any day now. And I consider my own death to be the same idea, to be ready at the moment when I die, and to not have given up any faith is the same idea. And that's why all of our forefathers who believed are also blessed, because it's not about being the lucky one who's there when he returns as much as it is God knows that you were still ready, even though it's been thousands of years and there haven't been big prophetic, reassurances along the way. So, in other words, I think that the later it gets, the more blessed you are for being a vigilant Christian who does not give up on faith and who still reads these words and is still touched by them and is still spreading it and teaching it. I think that's amazing. In verse 41, then finally somebody else talks. Peter says, Lord, are you telling this parable for us or for all? Good question, actually. And the Lord said, who then is the faithful and wise manager, whom his master will set over his household, to give them their portion of food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find doing so when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. But if that servant says to himself, my master is delayed in his coming, and begins to beat the male and female servants, and to drink and eat and get drunk, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at the hour he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and put him with the unfaithful. And that servant who knew his master's will, but did not get ready or act according to his will receive a severe beating. But the one who did not know and did what deserved a beating will receive a light beating. Guys, Jesus is so based. He's so awesome. If you are ignorant about what Jesus wants, and, you're not ready when he comes, you're still going to get a beating. It's just going to be a lighter beating than if you knew exactly what you're supposed to do and then you still didn't do it. Oh, I didn't see on YouTube. Rita, welcome very much. Let me bring the chat over here. I'll notice it a lot easier. I keep missing YouTube comments because I have it on the other side of the screen. Yeah, welcome, Rita. From South Louisiana. Says, his word never returns to him void. Very true. We need to, hear the word and to bring it to fulfillment, to show that it is not void. He did not say it in vain. So the servant who knew his master's will but did not get ready will receive a severe beating. The one who did not know the master's will and did what deserved a beating will receive a light beating. Everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required. And from him whom they entrusted much, and from him to whom they've entrusted much, they will demand the more. So, what kind of stuff is he talking about here? Is he talking about money? Is he talking about real estate and property and protection by the government and the Roman Catholic Church? They have much because so many people have been given to their authority? Or is he talking about the one who knows more? The scholars, the Bible study teachers, those of us who have the internet, we have better resources for free at our disposal instantly right now than the most educated people, the richest and most educated people 1,000 years ago, who were closer to the time of Jesus. But us now, later, we have better resources than anyone in history, hands down, flat out. Is that what he's talking about? That we've received much, and so more will be expected of us? That's how I felt when I was writing Maybe Everyone is Wrong. I'm like, we have the internet. We have scholarship. We have encyclopedias. Wanwin's, very good to have you here. Feel free to, we've got probably like 20 verses left, so feel free to check out the rest of it. I'm going to have to hurry the last bit because I need to go before long too, but I wonder what he's talking about here. He's talking about everyone who's been entrusted much. Is that the people or is that the knowledge? Because I don't have anyone under my command. I'm not a church leader. I don't have some sort of thing you become a member to. So in that sense, I haven't been entrusted with much of anything. But I feel like I've been entrusted with a lot just because of the fact that I have the internet and I'm literate. I know how to read and write English. I'm healthy. I can communicate. I feel like God has given me a lot, and I have to respect that and try to make the best use of it that I can. Warchild says, Christ will know those who are his flock and those who worship false idols. Definitely true. Lucelli says, sounds like Jesus was saying, live each day as if I'm coming back any time now. Yes, and I think he's also saying that the more time goes by, the more credit you will get when you do live that way. Warchild says, this is a church to me. I could see that. I mean, definitely, I think there are other verses in the Bible that says those who have been given care over people, more will be expected of them. And they're held to a higher standard when you are entrusted with a bunch of people. And remember that for the majority of history, most people were not literate and did not have access to the physical books that we have. And so you were really trusting your leaders. Like, you would just ask your preacher or your pastor or whoever, what does Jesus mean when he says this or when he says that? And you had no ability to confirm or deny or look up what the guy was saying. You needed that leader to tell you the truth. And so I totally believe that that is part of this. But yeah, Chad says, I think both. Oh, Warchild, you're saying this is a church. What we're doing right now is a church. Oh, I didn't. If that's what you're saying, I didn't pick up on that because I didn't think of it that way. But Kelly says, I love this church. I need this for my spirit, man. Well, certainly those who come to me and want to learn from me and want to have me help them study God's word, I will do whatever I can to try to help you with it. And I consider that to be a very serious responsibility. And that's why we do this. And so it's also great to think about that actually if you're put in charge of anything, you'll get a reward if you're doing it faithfully when he comes back or when your time is up. And so it's not a burden or a pain in the ass. It's a wonderful opportunity. And I think more people should want to take that opportunity. Thank you, Kelly, for the gifts. Kay says, I agree. And Kelly says, you're a vessel. That is amazing to hear. It makes me want to do way more. I work full time and I do not have a lot of time to do this, but I take it very seriously. And I'm doing these studies for myself as much as for you guys. And so let's keep going here. Verse 49. Oh man, this is one of my favorite passages. Oh man, it's almost sad that I can't do almost an hour just on this next part. Here's what he says. I came to cast fire on the earth, and I wish that it was already kindled. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great my distress is until it is accomplished. Do you think I have come to send peace on the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. For from now on, in one house there will be 5 divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. That passage right there is, I do not have time to unpack it fully, but for him to just come out and say, I came to cast fire on the earth, and he wishes that it was already being kindled, there's just so much there. Like, compare that to what everyone talks about Jesus, and they talk about him as if he's just a philosopher and that he just, wanted to help people love each other more. There is love and there is fellowship within Christianity, but he came to set the world on fire. That's not a good thing. That's never a good thing, a pleasant thing, okay? It is judgment. He came to judge the world. And he found that it was evil. You can read in other verses. I don't know if we will get to it. It's not in this chapter. But he says that the world is already judged. And he says that it's judged because they've rejected him. And I don't remember the exact quote, but so the fact that he came to judge the world, this is the thing. We're not just waiting for a judgment. Satan has already lost. Jesus has already won. The world is already judged. The fate of the world is already set in stone. We cannot change the fact that this world will be destroyed and it will be replaced by a new creation. That means it ties in with the whole idea of Satan being the king of this world, the ruler of this world that has all the nations under his control, distinguishing that from his kingdom, God's kingdom, which is a eternal kingdom that is godly, that will never fade away. He says, I wish it was already kindled. I wonder what that means. To me, that means that there should be more righteous judgment happening in the world already, and that Jesus is starting it off, but he wants more of that. He wants more division. I made a whole series of videos on my old account about how Jesus is the most divisive person in human history, and everyone thinks he's supposed to unite everybody. I don't think so. I think he's the most divisive person in human history. That's why to this day, if you say you're a Christian, there will be people on every side of every political party and everywhere in the world that will hate you immediately. They can't stand Jesus Christ. The world hates Jesus, and they hate us for loving Jesus. He says, I have a baptism to be baptized with. How great is my distress until it is accomplished. I have to say, the word baptism just means dipping. Once you understand that, I just wrote about this recently in my book that I'm writing, but when it says in the Bible that Jesus baptizes with fire. Once you understand that, to be dipped in the fire is actually what Jesus is supposed to do to our soul. He dips you in the fire. That's what baptism with Jesus means. John the Baptist baptized with water, and it became a custom of Christians everywhere to baptize with water. But spiritually, Jesus kind of does the opposite. He baptizes you in fire. He dips you into a fire. That's not a pleasant experience, by the way. This is why I'm suspicious of people who have never had a strong conviction of sin and they've never feared God. This all ties together with me, with the fear of God. Jesus is saying, I'm going to burn this world to dust. I'm going to destroy this world. But I'm going to take the people who follow me, and I'm just going to give them a taste of that fire. I'm going to dip them in the fire so that they can know what's up. They can know what's important. They can know what they're supposed to be really afraid of, and not just be afraid of the crap of this world. Because whatever the world has to scare you with is nothing. He says, do you think I came to give peace to the earth? No. I came to send division. Jesus is not a peacemaker. He is the divider. In my old video, I made the joke, although it's true, Jesus is so divisive that we literally divided history when he was born. BC and AD is divided on Jesus. And even the atheists can't get away from that. Ultimately, Jesus is the one who's going to divide the sheep from the goats, the wheat from the tares. He divides everything. His word divides everything. His word is a two-edged sword, sharper than anything else. It divides the soul from the spirit, the bone from the marrow. Jesus is the divider. He divides everything perfectly and correctly. And he says that every household is going to be divided. Families are going to be divided against themselves. Jesus is not shy about this. He's not ashamed of this. He's not afraid of this. This is his function. His function is to set the world on fire and to expose the truth and to set apart those who belong to God from those who belong to the world. We shouldn't be ashamed of it either. We shouldn't be surprised when people hate us. We shouldn't be surprised when you preach something in the name of Jesus Christ, everyone hates you. You shouldn't be surprised when there's a conspiracy of the entire satanic world to kill us and to poison us and to make us sterile and to imprison us and to slander us and to cast suspicion on us and to try to diminish and invert everything in the Bible. None of that should be the slightest bit surprising to you if you understand what Jesus is saying here. He already judged the world. It's too late for the world. But we are here until he comes back, like servants who are staying up late for him to come back. And that's why when we are faithful in the third watch, we get an extra blessing, and why we need to be afraid of God and realize he is delaying his time. It says, the servant says he's delayed in his coming. Okay. He's delayed in his coming. It doesn't change anything. We have to be faithful all the time because he's going to come back and he's going to judge the world and carry out the judgment. And in the meantime, we're going to be hated. Debbie says, what if he's asking for division because he wants us to be not from the world? Exactly. Just how, that's the whole idea of holiness, by the way, if you guys didn't know that. The word holy means separated. So if you want to be holy, it doesn't mean that you're perfect. It doesn't mean you're like God. That's not what holy means. God is holy, holier than anything because he's the most removed from everything else. He's above and beyond and infinitely superior to everything else. But holy does not mean flawless. Holy just means separated. So we are supposed to be divided from the world. We're supposed to be divided into God's camp and set against the world. So if you want to be holy, just remember to separate yourself from what everyone in the world is doing and thinking. And spiritually, of course, is most important. Warchild says, may all men be wrong and God right. Yeah, I think the verse is, may all men be liars and God be found true. When you're fearing God, you are separating yourself from the world because the world fears each other. They fear man. They fear authority figures and popularity and, what am I going to eat? What am I going to wear? That's earlier in the chapter. We were reading about that. That's not what a godly person does. A holy person says, my life is already forfeit. My life belongs to God. He's my judge. He's the only thing I need to worry about. The world can go to hell. The world can be destroyed. It can't take away, it can kill me, but it can't destroy my soul, which is what we saw earlier. Not supposed to be afraid of those who can kill your body, but can't destroy your soul. It's a joke. If they want to kill my body, it means nothing. Because God has my soul in his care. And just as he said, it's of many more value than a bird, which God cares about the bird. So of course he cares about me and you as well. He says in verse 54, he said to the crowds, when you see a cloud rising in the west, you say at once, a shower is coming. And so it happens. And when you see the south wind blowing, you say, there will be a scorching heat. And it happens. You hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of earth and the sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time? Speaking, of course, I believe about this judgment that he's going to give and how he's going to divide the world up. Verse 57, and when you Why do you not judge for yourselves what is right? As you go with your accuser before the magistrate, make an effort to settle with him on the way, lest he drag you to the judge, and the judge hand you over to the officer, and the officer put you in prison. I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the very last penny. That's the final verse in this chapter. I wish we could go to the next chapter and could keep doing the study, but because that's not where it should end, but that is the end of the chapter. So let's talk about this last part here. The idea of them not interpreting the present time correctly, and why do you not judge for yourself what is right? The idea that they're going to judges and lawyers and trying to rely on the world's systems for justice is itself considered foolishness by God because, again, the world is evil. And so why are you going to an evil institution to try to fix things? It would be better for you. I don't know if we read that in this in Luke, but I remember reading it somewhere recently that it would be better for you to be defrauded than to, I think that might have been Corinthians. Paul said it'd be better to be defrauded than to go to the world and the worldly institutions. And Jesus is saying the same thing here. Again, making this distinction between the way the world works and the way that God works. You know, you're afraid of what you're going to eat. You're afraid of the world. You're afraid of who can kill you. You're not afraid of the judge of your soul. You're not afraid of, what actually matters. You don't have your priorities straight. Luke chapter 12, you could basically summarize by saying, this is the chapter about priorities. And we need to get our priorities straight and to be watchful and ready for Jesus to come back. And if he entrusts us with a lot of things, we need to make use of that. We are being watched. Our Father is watching and cares about us, but has expectations, and we have to submit to that. That's our priority. And he even says here, this is where he says, seek his kingdom and everything else will be added to you. So I would recommend this as sort of my closing thoughts here. Again, nobody preaches the kingdom. Everybody preaches salvation, forgiveness of sins, but they don't preach the kingdom. And I again want to remind you that the kingdom is the goal. The kingdom is what we belong to. It is the thing that distinguishes us from the rest of the world. You belong to it. I belong to it. We are brothers and sisters in Christ. When we belong to it, the Holy Spirit is moving within it and doing things within it, whether you're participating or not. It is happening. You've been given something, and whether you've been given a lot or a little, you're supposed to do something with that. Treat the kingdom as your life's daily purpose and not, am I forgiven? Does God love me? I feel so guilty and I'm so sorry and I sin and I have bad thoughts, and you're always just worried about how God is judging you and you need to be forgiven. Jesus already did everything on the cross. Now your job, if you're baptized by fire, if you're dipped, like he said, where does he say that? I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great is my distress until it is accomplished. He's obviously talking about, I think, his death and his resurrection, and the idea of being dipped, baptized in the earth, tasting death, and then being brought out of death. That's another dipping metaphor of getting a taste of it and then being released from it. But we're supposed to be baptized by the Holy Spirit, and then we're supposed to serve the kingdom. So when it says seek the kingdom, I never used to understand what that meant, but I'm getting a better handle of it as I get older, and I realize it's about serving your fellow Christians. It's about, of course, evangelizing to non-Christians and to testify and to never be ashamed of the gospel and to fight the good fight, to expose evil, to bring people's, well, I mean, the Bible says to bring everything into submission of Christ, to make sure that when you have conversations, when you're writing an essay, you're doing a TikTok videos, you're doing just conversations with normal people in your everyday life, that you end up bringing it back to Christ, and you try to, maybe at a workplace that could be inappropriate. I'm not telling you to cause trouble at work necessarily, but if you're having a private conversation, just do what you can to glorify the kingdom and to bring people into remembrance of it. And don't get so hung up on just sin and forgiveness, because that turns into a neurotic sort of self-obsession, whereas you should fix things inside, and you should work on that privately, but you should also help the kingdom, help people love it, and to take it seriously, to fear God. And that's what we're told to do until he comes back. And then you'll be rewarded if you're found being faithful late in the watch, so to speak. So that was Luke chapter 12. It was all about priorities and fearing God and not man. Do not be afraid of man. Do not be afraid of what the world can do to you. It's nothing. It doesn't matter. You store up your treasure on earth. You think you're protected. You're going to do what you can to be smart and to buy Bitcoin and to buy gold and to move to Mexico and try to find some sort of way to, get ahead. And none of that is going to end up mattering when, you have a service to do for God wherever you are, no matter where you are, and everything that you have can be taken away in an instant. And God is feeding the birds, and they don't do anything for it. They don't work for it. They can't work for it. And yet he's taking care of them. So think of that. Think of the fact that everything you need is being provided for you, and now the job is to serve his kingdom and to do something for him. Stephen says we spend 50% of our life at work. Why not there as well, as long as it doesn't inhibit productivity? I would just say, if you're dealing with customers, I think professionalism and coexistence and setting a good example is also a way of showing Christ in you. Here's a quick story. Okay, so I had a job where I was actually trained by a pastor of a church. And he would go around and annoy everybody around him by preaching at them, and they didn't want to hear it. A lot of them were not Christian, and he would preach at them, but they would all end up resenting him. He was a decent worker, but he was just sort of shoving the gospel in their face. And I didn't. I tried to be a good example and tell the truth and admit when I was wrong. And, for example, if I screwed up, I would go immediately and admit that I did something wrong. And I had more people come to me and ask me what my deal was, or talk to me about their spiritual concerns or their life, because they could see that there was something different about me. Nobody went to this guy and asked him anything. Nobody cared what this guy had to say. He sounded like he wanted to get more members in his church. He wanted to get more, obviously people think of donations and they think of that. And it was pushy. And I don't think being pushy at work is an effective strategy. I think that people do have problems in their life, and you can see it. And if you sympathize with them and they can tell that you are not like other people if you have a genuine love and sympathy for other people. And if they bring it up, it's so much better if they bring it up than if you bring it up. Or if you let them know that you're willing to talk about it, and then you say, personally, Jesus helped me and whatever, and you bring it up that way. But I would advise people to, if you're in a situation at school, at work, wherever you are, you're dealing with people who have their own stuff going on, and it's not outside of work, it's not a private setting, try to let them come to you, and then be a good example and be gentle and start the process that way. You certainly don't want to be condemning them or disrupting, because serving other people at work and being professional around other people, I believe that is part of a Christian lifestyle. And maybe you're the type of person, if you're really good, you can just get away with sort of like peppering in gospel stuff or Bible stuff in the middle of conversations or whatever. Or maybe you're lucky enough to work at a Christian business or something where they are just cool with that. But in my experience, people will bring it up to you because people have a need for Jesus in their life. And if you are a light, if you're being a good example and you're not participating in all the gossip and the crap that people talk about, and you always seem to bring things back to a good perspective, people will gravitate towards what you represent. And then if they ever want to know more about you, you can offer that as, where you're coming from. So there's a balance there. That's all I was trying to say. Conservative Joe says, exemplify the word and people will be drawn to you and you can share your story. Yeah, I mean, testimony is great. When people want to know your story, some people have an amazing story of their life. Like, my life story is not interesting, but, people still ask me for things because they see my point of view. But if you have a long, interesting story to your life, and you've been up and you've been down and you've had a lot of events in your life, tell that story and tell people how Jesus fits into it when they are interested. But first I think you have to interest them by being a good example. Okay, guys, I have to go, but God bless you and thank you for joining. Thank you for the 22,000 likes. That's a tremendous amount of likes. So you guys were definitely active this time. That's why we got more people in the room and more engagement. I do have to remind you, click on the bio link, my link tree. If you click on it, you'll just get a list, a very simple list with my books, my Telegram channel, my Discord, my Twitter account, my YouTube, and just so many good things. If you haven't checked out my books yet, I recommend that you do. Check out my YouTube if you're just familiar with me on TikTok, because one of these days this account might just disappear, and it will be very good for us to be able to talk over on YouTube as well, even if that's not currently what you're doing. And then the nice thing also is that everything I upload to TikTok or YouTube gets cross-posted over to Odyssey, although I don't promote my Odyssey as long as my YouTube exists. And so it's good to support the YouTube channel as well. So I appreciate when people are connected in more than one way. And then that way, if something happens one place, you're not just lost. We can recover and we can talk somewhere else. And I do live streams right there. This is all being live streamed on YouTube. So that's it for today. Tomorrow I want to come back and do another one. And I suppose we'll just do Luke chapter 13. So thank you. Thank you, Rita and Vic, Patronizing Saint, Lovely Soul, everyone else who was in YouTube and here. Chad says, loved your live. God bless you. God bless you as well. Laughing Home. Lucelli says, thank you, Terry, for that piece of advice. I always second guess myself about spreading the gospel. yeah, I don't think you want to push it. I think you want to draw people in. And I think you should be willing to be approached. You want to be approachable, but you don't want to be desperate. You don't want to come off as, hey, I'm just eager to tell you something about, how you have to live or you have to change or whatever. Um, you know, I think especially if you make it known that you personally believe in Jesus, that just plants a seed in everyone around you, and they're like, I might have to ask that person about that yet, because their conscience is gonna. God is going to do most of the work. Let's be honest. God is going to do all the heavy lifting. And then at some point, you're going to have the opportunity to do your little tiny, tiny little part, and God is going to do the rest. So don't pretend like you have all the control and it's really your job. It's God's job, and you get to be a part of it. And that's how we can serve the kingdom together. So thank you very much. I will hop off, and then tomorrow we should be coming back.